Alright, hey guys, so this is going to be a breakdown of my most recent motion graphics for the song Rain by Grandson, and just like last time, it's not going to be a specific tutorial, but more of an overall breakdown of how these movements work and how I achieve them. So if there's any part of the edit that you thought was interesting and didn't know how to do, hopefully this video can help you. Let's just get started. So there's a few notes I do want to say first, is that this effect itself is unfortunately all made possible by a plugin called Sapphire, and then there's this one effect from Sapphire called Sketch. And I really wanted to try to replicate this myself so I could tell you guys how to do it, but unfortunately I was not really able to do so. I know in DaVinci Resolve Studio there's a thing called pencil sketch, which makes it look stylized but more of a different style. I guess this does help if you do want to do something like this, but if you wanted to try to achieve the same thing, I'd recommend first taking a look at maybe edge detect and then maybe adding something like a noise on top of the edges to make it a bit more wobbly, like how this Sapphire sketch effect does it. If anyone does know of a tutorial that can achieve a similar look to this, be sure to let me know and I'll definitely pin the comment so other people can follow it. So in this first section, it is very simple. The only two nodes that really matter is the text node and then the DVE. So this DVE, it just mocks a 3D space. So you don't have to do a full setup with, you need a merge, camera, render, things like that. You can just use a DVE node and have it rotate in this axis or XYZ axis. Basically, it starts with a letter, which comes in, and then I added a transform to have sort of this glitchy effect where it starts with the scale all the way up and the aspect all the way up and then just shrinks it to glitch back into the normal size. And then I have a DVE. All it is doing is rotating around this pivot point, which is at the bottom, and then rotating out. So let me just make a mock one right now. So usually with the DVE, when you try to rotate anything, it's always around the center, but there's a pivot points that you can change. So if I move it all the way down to the bottom and then rotate the Z, now it's rotating around the bottom and makes a similar effect. So you can rotate it here, do whatever with these random rotations, and then keyframe everything. And then later over here, rotate this side. It would do a similar effect of going from the left side into the right side, but making it look like it's 3D. Each one of these DVEs are the exact same thing copied. So that's how you make this effect over here. So for the last text, there is a bit more effect when I had it enter the screen and exit the screen. And this is all just with a follower node. So if you right click this, you can add modify with follower. And then in the follower tab, you have a little bit of offset over here. And then you can go to the shading. Keyframe the appearance is what I did for this glitchy effect. Along with keyframe the appearance, you can go to the transform tab and then also keyframe the offset. And then everything would follow from one letter to the next. And when exiting the screen, I did the same thing. So all of this leads into the duplicate nodes. I wanted to make it a bit chaotic when transitioning out of this clip. My idea was just, I have all of these duplicates stacked on top of each other, rotated a little bit to the side, and then I have another duplicate that flips everything on the y-axis so that it copies it from top to bottom. And then this transform, it uses the same glitchy effect with changing the aspect and the size to make it look like this. This is just all stacking on top of each other to make it a little bit more chaotic on the transition itself. And then at the end of it, everything moves to the right with this final transform. Once you add some sort of sketch effect on top of it, it should look like this. In this area, I split the background apart, but this background only really works with the sketch effect, so I won't go too much detail into any of the other backgrounds. I just had a fast noise along with merge into a background to do this looping effect. And then I connected the sketch effect on top of it, which made it look like this. But yeah, I won't go too much into the background for the rest of the video. Moving on to the text. So I split it apart into two different adjustment clips. One of them is just coming in, and the other part is the massive text on the outside. So let's take a look at the smaller one first. The previous clip going to the right, so I want to continue that motion by coming from the left into the right. If I go into this text, it is really simple with this text over here, which is animating the tracking, but I also animated the appearance in the shading tab. I transformed it so that it comes from the right side and then has a edge wrap so that the text also appears when you scale it down. I added back the duplicates from the previous scene. They all come in together like this, and then lead itself back into the center. And I duplicated it again to flip on the y-axis so that they're mirrored on both sides. Once you have the sketch effect on top, it would look like this. For the next big rain text, this is just one bit of text added with a scale on the aspect to make it look like this, and keyframing the size so that it drops down a little bit, and then having a dent at the end of it so it can scale down and transform out that way. So because the previous scene scales down while exiting, the next one has to start really scaled up and then scale down. You just follow the motion. So every time you want to cut between a scene, you want to have some sort of motion from the previous scene that connects over to the next scene. So how I did this text is also just keyframing the follower. If I take a look at this text over here, another follower node. So when you right click modify with follower, you can go over here, change the delay, keyframe the appearance. Appearance is the only thing I animated for this text. So just spamming between the block one and then the outline and then the full one, and then the rest of the letters follow from that. I also wanted to have it on the top and the bottom. So I had to split it apart into one duplicating to the top and then another one duplicating to the bottom. And then I merged it all together with a transform that has the same glitchy effect with the scale and the aspect. And then this is what it looks like after adding the effect. And then to transition out of this one, I match cut it into a rectangle over here. So I had everything scaled downwards only on the y-axis like this. On the next scene, I can cut into a rectangle that starts here and continue to scale down. And then after match cutting this, I had another sapphire effect called kaleidoscope, which helps do this. But I'm pretty sure you can do the same thing with, yeah, mirrors. Inside the mirrors node, you can choose kaleidoscope. I didn't keyframe anything, but this is basically the same effect as the kaleidoscope. So what I did was just, I added a mirror over here into the kaleidoscope, and then I changed the center size a little bit so that it's not connecting the line. What you can do is now just keyframe the angle to make it look like this, while also having a transform that has the edge mirror. So then when you change the angle, you can have a trippy looking effect like this, or you can also keyframe the rectangle itself to do this. So this is all basically doing the same thing with a kaleidoscope once you keyframe it. I think that's a good alternative to the kaleidoscope, but I'll just show you what I did for this one as well. So there's two beats here, two main beats I want to focus on. One beat is on this match cut, and then the second beat is on another rotation right here. So on these beats, I wanted to move everything. So the first beat is just zooming out. And then the second beat is where everything inside rotates. That's the only things I was focusing on here. In order to make the inside move like this, the reason why I use the kaleidoscope effect here is because you can animate the inside rotate, which makes it do something like this. But you can mimic a similar effect by just rotating the angle itself on the rectangle mask. And then after everything, I also have a zoom blur on the outside to make only the edges a bit more blurry, and then a dent on top of everything to have a sort of lens distortion. So this next part over here, the main bulk of it is all just the same DVE node. So I never even used a camera for this. This is all just part of the DVE. So if we take a look at this, it's all text merged into one multi-merge. This is what the multi-merge looks like. And then all of these text animations I already covered except this one. So I'll quickly go over this one. The first thing I had was a modifier with a follower. And then this follower is just animating appearance. So if I only look at the follower, this is what it's doing. Because when I animated the appearance, let's just take a look at the first letter because all the keyframes affecting the first one and then all the other letters follow afterwards. So the first one, it is solid, square, and then after a little bit, square, solid. I noticed over here, instead of turning to a square, it was the outline. I think because there's still a tiny bit of gap between each frame, I think the other letters, instead of going directly to this one, they went to the middle, which is just happened to be this outline effect. Anyway, it's close enough, so I didn't mind too much about it because it's meant to look glitchy anyway. But what you can do now is right click the text box in the follower tab and then add a text scramble on top. And in this text scramble, you can keyframe it the same way I was doing over here. So now you can see it first text scrambles and then unscrambles itself only right here. And that is this effect. So all the other texts are also just various different ways to make it look a bit more glitchy, but I tried to vary it a little bit more. The first text over here just starts with squares. This one has random follower with the animating the appearance. This just comes in from the top. This is I just showed, which is the random plus follower. And then this is just animating the tracking of it. And then this glitch effect is also from Universe. You can do the same thing with DaVinci Resolve's built-in digital glitch. And then this would likely do the same thing. There is a glitch effect, but if you don't want the chromatic, let me just see what this even is doing. It looks like you can just get rid of the displace. It'll do the same type of glitch. But you can do something with that type of glitch. Or if you have reactor, you can also find a glitch effect from there. It's very minimal and you don't notice it too much when the video is actually happening. Moving on to the actual bulk of it, which is the DVE. On every beat, it's stopping in a new location. The things I was animating is the entire rotation and then also the center moving and then the Z move as well. There's a technique that I also just found out recently, but you can actually smooth out the center keyframes in the viewport right here. Let's say I have this multi-merge going to this and I want to animate it into 3 different places. Without smoothing anything out, it's just very jarring. So it won't look great, but you can Control A and then Shift F so it flattens everything so that it is smoothed a little bit. And I'm just going to open this up with T, click the lock, and then ease it a little bit more. So that already looks decent, but I don't really like how it stops right here and then continues going. It is smooth, but that's not really the best right now. What matters is the center. So if I just change the keyframe a little bit so that it does this, and then now it should never stop fully at this part. What you can notice is that it's very jarring. There's like a right angle here, so it would quickly turn around. What I did not know, and why I kept using 3D cameras instead of DVEs, is that you can select everything, or Shift A to select everything, and then just Shift S. And then now it's smooth. When it tries to stop at this point, it's no longer a right angle, and it's not jarring anymore. So you can just do this. So now it looks much smoother. And using DVEs is also, I believe it might be lighter on your computer. So instead of using a 3D space, you can always just use DVEs to animate something like this. Just camera movements. And then now with the sketch effect on top, it would look like this. I'll just quickly go through the background again here. It's nothing special. I just copied the same DVE once I was done with it into the background. And then this is the exact same DVE with the same path over here. Now the background also follows the exact same path. Then let's move on to the next part. Let's just look at this first section real quick. All this is doing, it's using the same type of DVE from the first verse, and it just comes in from the right side and then exits out from the left side. I have a DVE here, which is very similar to how I did it first in the first verse. And then I had an instance of it, which you can do copy, right click, paste instance. I put it on top of the other text for just the. After merging it all together, it would look like this. For the background, I found a video online of the rose blooming and then had a transform that basically is the main control from here. So this transform has the edge mirror to make it into this type of reflection at the end of it. So it just comes in from the right side. As it leaves to the left, I also scale it down really quickly and then move it to this position so that these two roses would reflect in the center. I just also added a mask on top because in the first rotate in, there's all these leaves up here. I just had a mask that just masked it out, which is just a rectangle right here. And I moved it out of the way. There's a brightness contrast node to make it a bit more contrasted. So that's just this beginning part. But the next part is where it started to lag my computer. I had the same rose video over here, but this one wasn't using the plugin. It was just a bunch of duplicates spammed on top of each other. Let's just take a look at this real quick. Each of these are its own sets of roses. So the first one comes in, I key out the background using HSL keyer. I'll show what's going into it and show what's going out of it on the right side. So this transform just moves it up, and then I have a duplicate, 6 copies around the center of it to make it look like this. The next one, this is what's going in and this is what's going out. The main thing is just one transform over here, keyframe so that it goes up, and the rest of it all follow because they're duplicated 12 times. And then the next transform, same type, same thing. At this point, if you merge it all together, it'll all be stacked right here. So you can see this is the first layer, the second layer, and then there's one back there, which is the third layer. So I had to add another transform to make it much bigger than the current scene. So then when you merge it together finally, it would be all the way in the background. At the end of this entire chain, I have a DVE and a transform that scales it down more. So it's much more visible here. Yeah, the fourth layer is also just the same thing. This is just the fourth layer. This DVE is the main control for the entire scaling of this section. And then let me just show the keyframes real quick. On each beat, I wanted to zoom out a little bit, but I didn't feel like manually keyframing it. What we can do is on this right here, you can right click, set loop relative. And then now this set of keyframes right here will constantly stack on top of each other. It's gonna repeat the exact same thing, but relative to the past keyframe. So now on each beat, it would zoom out slightly and then show a bit more every single time. The gist of it is all just spamming a bunch of duplicates all on top of each other. And there you go, that's the background. And then the text on top is very simple. Also, the biggest carry here is, again, the sketch effect. But if you do remove all of these effects, so the bulk of all these texts are all very simple. There's almost no text animation. It's all just coming in and then fading out. And sometimes I animated the appearance over here in the shading tab to do this, but it's just spamming random glitch effects to make it look more chaotic. I also have some transforms and some glows on each of these. So for example, this one flickers the glow. And then I have a transform here, and then I have a transform that just moves it to the correct spot with a really high aspect so that it stretches for the entire screen. So this part is all very simple once you take only a look at the individual parts. For the sketch effect, helps sell this effect much better because this sketch had a bumpy sketch, and then when I change the frequency here, it makes it look like a very unstable type of text over here. The last part is adding a lens distortion on top of everything. To make this effect over here, I had the edge behavior to wrap around. So if it was black, this is what the lens distortion would have looked like. So it would first be sort of stretched, come in, exit out this way. But I had the edge behavior on wrap around, so it would wrap to the outsides of it as well. Yeah, that is this text over here. For the next transition part itself, it's sort of like a break in the song. So I wanted to flash a bunch of different things randomly. So here is the only things I really used. So the first thing is this is a media that comes in, and then I also had my logo for a quick second. So some of these frames are inverted. Some of these frames have their brightness changed and then the contrast or saturation changed. And this is all just flashing for one frame. I have a transform here that I also zoomed in really quickly for just one frame. I had the kaleidoscope back over here, but you can easily do this with mirrors as well. So if I drag it into here, so with mirrors, you can also just mess around with the keyframes, anything to make it look more chaotic. And I have another dent here that when exiting a scene, it makes it much more stretched. And then that is basically the final output. So this entire section is all just spams of different effects for one frame to make it as flashy as possible. Let's move on to the next part. So this part is probably a more technical part, but let me just remove all the sketches so you can see it. This is what it looks like before the sketches. And this was slightly trickier with these shape nodes. At the end of the day, these are all just an ellipse with the length changed so it's a little bit lower, and then the angle keyframe. So that's what both of these do. All of these are just keyframed and then moving in opposite directions. For these two keyframes, notice the scene starts all the way back here, but the keyframes don't start until it's maybe around halfway through. And that's because of this S duplicate here, which has a time offset of 11 frames, which is why these outside ones that are duplicated are first moving only until around frame 13, 14 is when these center ones start moving. This is all made possible with the time offset for the duplicating. And then I also have a transform that helps scale it down on every beat. And then I rendered it out and then had a DVE just help add more of a 3D effect on top of it. So this just comes in at more of an angle instead of just being straight head on. But that's just this outside effect area. So what about the text itself? Because each of these outside ones aren't actually real nodes, only these inside ones are real nodes. The issue is that if you want to try to follow inside one of these empty sections, there just wasn't an easy way to do it by just choosing to follow. So usually what you can do is if you have a S text or any other text, you want it to follow the rotation of this ellipse. You can hover over this angle, and on the bottom left now, it says S ellipse 1 dot angle. So what you could do is maybe for this rotation, you can right click this expression and then type in S ellipse 1 dot angle. And then now this will follow the same rotation as this. So this is using expressions so that it would follow the exact same keyframes as something else. Because the duplicating caused it to time offset, there's nothing you can type in that accesses this duplicated shape. So what I had to do was, instead of following just this angle over here, I had to add a time offset on top of the script itself. So if you go into the text, the only text animation is that it flashes red. And then inside the settings of it, there's a frame render script. I set its own text angle, the angle Z, which is what I was animating before, to equal to the S ellipse 1. I get the value of the angle, offset the time by 22 frames, and then I add a little bit more so that the angle would start at the same place where the duplicated one started. So if I merge it quickly, you can see that this text now follows the outside duplicated rotation. And then so does the other one, which is the exact same script, but then I changed the time offset to 11 frames this time, plus a little bit more to match this area. So all of these now follow the duplicated shape on the outside. And then there's no other text animation aside from that, except this last one. I also animated the appearance in the shading tab again, just like last time. And I added a slight bit of red light rays to do this. And then when merging it all together, this is what it looks like. And let me just add back the sketch effects. So that's what it looks like once everything's all put together. So this part is the only part where I added actual clips on the outside of it. So each of these clips are just randomly taking screenshots of each word. So I have all these images I had to take. This was the roses, other roses, other roses. For each of these clips, I just zoomed in into the center using this tool over here. So you can set a safe area guide and then have it title in the center. So I just made sure that this crosshair was on top of the middle of each word. For this picture, I aligned it to the center, next one aligned the center, next one aligned center, and so on. And each of these are all just random websites where I found just the text, because no one's actually going to read anything else outside of it, because this is what rose disease is. I don't even know. And then I added a adjustment layer on top of it so that when the previous clip is turned to the left, the next one continues by turning to the left. In this adjustment layer, there's one transform right here that rotates itself left. And I also had a brightness that turned down the saturation so there's no color. I inverted it because I wanted it to stay mostly black. I had another rectangle on top of it, lifting the red of it. Finally, there's another transition one on top of it. This one is using a couple different effects from different places which aren't built into DaVinci Resolve. So we have a damaged TV from BCC, but there are other analog damages that you could use. So this analog damage is something else I also use quite a lot. So let me just show both sides comparison, and then let me just choose a random preset, like maybe like an old VHS. And then of course you can also always add more on top of it to make it as close as that one as possible. So something like this maybe is already close enough. And I have another one which is chromatic aberration, but you can use the same thing with like I think RGB splitter, is it? Yeah, so RGB splitter is also somewhere that's built into DaVinci Resolve. So instead of using this chromatic aberration, you can have a splitter and then just offset the scales just very slightly so that there's a chromatic aberration. And then I noticed also there's a slight dent, so you can also just add a dent on top of it, or maybe not even a dent, like a lens distortion, then revert the distortion a little bit like this. And then now it's already pretty similar to the Universe plugin. So that is that part over here. And have another lens distortion stacked on top of it to make this effect even more amplified. I have another zoom blur here to animate it leaving the screen, to have it zoom like this. And I have one last dent to help it leave the screen a bit more amplified. And yeah, that's this section over here. So this section is the only one I use actual 3D on. So I set up a 3D environment here. I use the depth of field effect to make these all blur out in the background. So let me just remove the sketch effect real quick. If you notice in this viewport over here, each of these texts are all just coming in at different times far away from each other. So then when it's all merged together, when the camera moves back really quickly, all these texts appear in front of the camera. And then the way these all animate in is also still just using a follower modifier. So if you have a follower modifier, you can go here, animate the offset of it so that it comes up quickly, and then have the follower timing to be random but one by one, and then have a slight delay on it. I think I use the same effect for all of these texts. But in order to get the depth of field, you have to go to the render 3D, change it from software render to hardware render, and then in accumulation effects you have to click enable accumulation effect, depth of field. To control where the camera is looking to have this effect, you have to go to the camera over here, control visibility, and click on focal plane. So this focal plane is where it would have the most focus on. I try to put it far enough away so that when the text actually comes in and it's readable on screen, it's basically right in front of it. You can also definitely keyframe the focal plane as well to track onto the text longer, but I thought this was already fine. The last thing I added was these particles. So I had 1p emitter here, which is just rectangle, it's just cube. And then these cubes are, you notice over here, there's a couple cubes over here. So none of these cubes are actually moving. If you track this one over here, they just spawn in and stay in place. When the camera moves backwards, it looks like they're rushing to the back, but they're all just here while the camera's moving really fast. And then I have another P emitter that is taking in a long rectangle. All of these have a really high velocity going down really quickly to simulate like a rain effect. And I merged the particles together and then rendered it out. And then this is what it looks like. So this last section is just a lot more appearance and shading spam. Let me take a look here. The first thing is this text. The main animation is that I animated the tracking of it to come in like this. And then I flickered it red along with changing the appearance over here. I spammed it randomly a little bit. And then I also keyframed the word into bloom at this point. And then here is where I've wanted to have this sketch effect in the background as well. So I had to split apart this text, one that goes into a sketch and the other one to merge it back into itself. So that's how over here, there's a noise in the background along with the text. I also had a duplicate here that just copied the same movements with a time offset of 3. So then they would be slightly offset. And I merged it along with another background. Once it cut to the different word, okay, this is a caching issue with it showing it twice. Anyway, I'll just show the background itself. The first thing for this background is once it cuts to the next word and it was going chaotic with the sketch effect, I added my logo with a color corrector and added a sketch on top of that to merge it in just for this split second. And then I also had the same exact Rose video that comes in. I color corrected it a little bit, cropped it, keyed out the background, and then transformed it to be above here. And I duplicated it one time around the center of it so that it would be flipped on its back. And then I have this merge here that keyframed the rotation of it when it came in. And then this merge over here is what's controlling both of these turning on and off. First, the logo comes in, turns off, and then this one comes in. And I also added a slight flash with this background over here. So it's a white flash. There's a one frame where it blends in the white background. Finally, there's a final sketch that deteriorated the picture. That makes it, and that results in this final edit here. So the one last thing I want to go over is the global effects. This time was really simple because, again, the sketch effect carried so hard, but I added a flicker addition. So there's a very small flicker in the background, added a glow on top of everything, and then a vignette on the outside. That's the only effects I really added. And then right now this glow is super amplified because I'm on playback quarter, but when you finally render it out, it actually doesn't look too bad. Yeah, I hope that was really informative and you learned something out of it, but there you go. That's the breakdown of the entire edit. If there's anything else that I missed that I didn't cover, just let me know and then I'll do my best to explain it through a reply. Thank you so much for watching.